what's up? Welcome to Dangerous Ideas. I'm Lee Camp. And I thought I'd switch up the background. We got a collapsing empire. Why not have the collapsing New York City Metro behind me? So that's the background this time. For those of you on the podcast, you're really missing out. But anyway, we got a big and important show. Horror stories still going on in Gaza, still being perpetrated by Israel. But also, I want to get to Israel's crushing of journalism. As we have more details, new details about the American journalists that they are prosecuting under a law that could lock him up forever or even involve the death penalty for being a journalist. Now, would they go after the death penalty? I don't know about that, but still, it is horrific. We have more details of that. Oh no, it's the only democracy in the it's the only democracy, right? In the Middle East. It's the only happy free time. What? You reported something we don't like? Well, we need to execute you. I'm also going to get to a New York Times article. Yes, believe it or not, a New York Times article on how Israel is using Palestinians as human shields. That's coming up, as well as the largest single bank fine, I think, in history for money laundering. It's not as big as some of the bank fines, I think, after 2008, but largest in history for money laundering and facilitating money laundering. I have so many important stories for you. I hope you will help this show keep going by clicking thumbs up, clicking share, all those good things, and let's do it. Let's get into it. Let's start off with, and I know this story kind of started to come out last Thursday, so I did mention it on the last live stream Thursday. I wasn't live streaming Friday, so I mentioned a little, but we didn't have all the details, and a lot more has happened since. And believe it or not, even The Guardian, yes, the mainstream media is getting so shamed out of ignoring so many of these important stories that they are now covering some of them. The Guardian put out an article. Of course, it was an opinion piece because they didn't want to possibly say that, Israel trying to execute journalists is a bad thing just officially. They wanted to make an opinion piece. But the title is, Why Has Israel Detained American Journalist Jeremy Lafredo? And this is, again, I mentioned it on Thursday. This is the gray zone journalist Jeremy Lafredo, who was captured, beaten, essentially kidnapped, all his devices stolen. And he is now out for the moment, out of prison, but not allowed to leave the state of Israel, and could be sentenced to a lot more time. It's not over for him. American Jeremy Lafredo was one of 5 journalists reportedly detained by the IDF on October 9th. He's reportedly charged with endangering national security. Well, if the truth endangers your national security, then maybe you got a fucked up nation right there. Isn't that a problem? It's kind of similar with the U.S. If the truth is a real threat to your national security, then maybe your nation should stop behaving like a big hole. Anyway, endangering national security and aiding and sharing information with the enemy, apparently because of his reporting on Iranian strikes. So they're claiming that reporting, like being a reporter, is sharing information with the enemy. Lafredo has reportedly been released from custody, but is barred from leaving Israel as authorities try to build their case against him. But no matter what direction it takes, it should serve to highlight the plight of dozens of Palestinian journalists who are being held incommunicado in Israeli prisons. Incommunicado, of course, is Italian for pasta. No, I'm kidding. It means not in communication. But but I do like that The Guardian did not just make this about Jeremy Lafredo. They made it about the Palestinian journalist. And of course, one of the only reasons, or the only reason, that his story is so much bigger and is getting talked about so much more and is even being covered by The Guardian is because he's an American. As Israel continues to assassinate one journalist after another, those aren't Americans for the most part, and therefore they don't matter, according to most Western media. Lafredo's American citizenship makes it more likely, but by no means guaranteed, that the Biden administration might actually care that he's being detained. After all, Joe Biden was eager to claim credit for the release of journalists Evan Gershkovich and Alsu Kurmasheva, who were held in Russian prison on bogus charges. So, yeah, but there's a big difference here, right? One is it serves U.S. imperial propaganda to say Biden freed these Americans that Russia was holding. Yay! Because it's anti-Russian. Whereas it does not serve U.S. propaganda to say, oh, Israel is threatening to execute an American journalist for doing journalism. As you'll see in a moment, he was doing journalism that NPR and other stations were also doing, but we'll get to that in a second. The administration has often claimed that it doesn't micromanage Israel's affairs. Yeah, it's funny how they only micromanage the countries that they consider adversaries, whereas they don't micromanage, or they claim not to micromanage, countries like Israel as they commit genocide. Israel, it reminds us, is a sovereign country, albeit one whose wars we bankroll. That excuse is not available when the journalist is American. And then they put in parentheses here, although that hasn't helped much in the case of Shireen Abu Akleh. Shireen Abu Akleh, as you recall, is the American journalist who was executed. I think she was American and Palestinian, but was executed by the IDF. This is before October 7th, before a year ago. But interestingly, I was inside the National Press Club. This is like over a year ago, year and a half ago or something, and for a Assange event. And the National Press Club is in D.C. It was a block from where I used to film RT, which also means, Redacted Tonight. Which means it's also a block from the White House. And I went in there, and it's where, it's considered where all the mainstream journalists can go and hang out, but it's also where they have press conferences. But it's not only their press conferences. That you can also, like Jill Stein would have a press conference in the National Press Club and sometimes and things like that. But when I went in there, they had a giant poster plasma screen of Shireen Abu Akleh celebrating her after she had been murdered. But hilariously, the national press is funded by and is they're the ones who are writing the vast majority of them are the ones writing the articles that manufacture the consent for war that got Shireen Abu Akleh killed. They're the ones that create the propaganda that allows us to continue the wars, that allows Israel to continue committing war crimes, that allows Israel to continue to commit genocide, that got Shireen Abu Akleh killed. And yet they put up a big poster of her. It's kind of like the statues of MLK that we have in the nation's capital and elsewhere. Oh, sure, they executed him, but now we can put up statues of him. Anyway, it complicates matters that Lafredo reports for the Gray Zone, an outlet that has been accused of carrying Russian and Chinese propaganda. Here is The Guardian being The Guardian. Gray Zone has no connection to Russia or China. They've not taken money from either of those governments, and they are not, carrying water for them. They just happen to, like me, want to report the truth and are not beholden to the U.S. corporate shit show, and therefore they're accused of being connected to Russia and China. And something this Guardian article does not mention is that the Washington Post, also over a year ago, published an article going after the Gray Zone, trying to malign them, trying to define them, which is often one and the same. And they claimed that, the Gray Zone appears to maybe have been funded by Iran or something. Completely false. But someone was, I think it might have been Kit Clarenberg, was pointing out, how much do you want to bet that the Israeli government, as they try and prosecute Jeremy Lafredo, are using that Washington Post article that's completely false to say, look, Lafredo's outlet is funded by Iran. Completely false. But they use it to try and go after people like Gray Zone reporters. The administration is embroiled in a separate and constitutionally dubious fight against alleged propagandists. I assume they're talking about the one against the Uhuru 4, against Scott Ritter, or against the company that they claim a couple of RT employees last year helped fund, that then funneled money to Tim Pool and Dave Rubin, etc. Anyway, I assume that's what they're talking about. The day of Lafredo's arrest, another Gray Zone reporter had a heated exchange with the State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller. I covered that on this show because it was hilarious to watch a Gray Zone reporter at the State Department press conference say, how long are you going to let this genocide go on? And of course, the State Department's like, what? This, what genocide? What are you talking about? And then he said, well, you stand up there and spit this bullshit. And then they were like, no, you can't say the words that are real. But whether Lafredo's detention is justifiable has nothing to do with Gray Zone's editorial standards, which Gray Zone reports more truth than The Guardian does. So this is another bit of The Guardian being The Guardian and taking jabs at Gray Zone while Gray Zone does better reporting than The Guardian. Editorial standards, it's solely a question of whether he was arrested for a crime or for reporting stories authorities didn't want told. If Israel's theory is that reporters illegally share information with the enemy whenever the enemy reads the news, that could criminalize a whole lot of journalism. Yeah, basically, it would criminalize all good journalism. Any type of journalist is legit covering what's actually going on. It would criminalize that. If Israel has proof that Lafredo did something more nefarious, then it should be specific. But of course they don't. Of course they don't have more. The Dissenter reports that several more mainstream journalists reported similar information and footage that Lafredo did. And now I want to show you that this is from Dan Cohen, who is pointing out that Lafredo was beaten and detained in Israel for reporting the exact same information about damage caused by Iranian strikes that PBS reported. Here's PBS correspondent Nick Schifrin and his post showing him reporting about the damage done in Israel. So basically, PBS reports it, not arrested. Jeremy Lafredo reports it, and because he's with Gray Zone and it's easier to go after him than to go after a U.S. government outlet like PBS, U.S. government-funded outlet like PBS, they arrest Jeremy Lafredo under charges that could ultimately see him in prison the rest of his life. Boy, slight difference there. One is completely fine. The other, prison forever. It's just utterly ridiculous and utterly hypocritical, of course. Israel has killed well over 100 journalists in the war. Yeah, it's like 160 or something. They're, by saying well over, I think they're shooting really low. Strong evidence indicates that Israel deliberately targeted some of the journalists it has killed, i.e. most of the journalists it has killed. And this is the most journalists that have ever been killed in any conflict ever, intentionally. Ever. Now, granted, there was no such thing as journalists a few hundred years ago, but still, past several hundred years, they have the most journalists ever killed. Way more than World War II. Way more than the Vietnam War. Less discussed is that Israel has also arrested dozens of Palestinian journalists. I wasn't even aware of this. I thought they just killed them all. So maybe arrested is better, I guess, of the options. But since October 7th, 2023, as documented by groups like the Committee to Protect Journalists and Reporters Without Borders, as of October 9th, according to CPJ, 43 Palestinian journalists remain imprisoned by Israel, a record number. Many of them are held under administrative detention, which means no charge, no trial. We can just keep you in prison forever. In some instances, even detainees' locations are unknown. Catch's Compass says that it's 175 journalists. Yeah, some of these numbers are hard to come by. I have seen upwards of 170. So, thank you guys so much for the comments and for throwing some comments in there and supporting the show and everything. But yeah, this is horrifying what they're trying to do to Jeremy Lafredo. I mean, he is free at the moment, not free to leave Israel, which is not really free. And hopefully they drop this. It will come down, it does seem, to some degree, as to what the Biden administration does, because the Biden administration doesn't give a shit about journalists. They don't give a shit about Gray Zone. That's true. But sometimes they don't like the PR. They just think it's not great PR. So they may put the slightest bit of pressure on Israel to drop this. But it is absolutely the criminalization of journalism. I thought number one democracy in the Middle East, totally free, right? In Israel? No, not so much. Thank you, Adrian, for the super chat. The fourth branch, Immortal Technique, fits our time. Yes, Immortal Technique has some great songs that age very well, in that nothing really changes. Just gets worse. Just seems to get worse. Okay, let's move on to how Israel is using Palestinians as human shields. Hey, Dusan, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, and I apologize, is a follower from Serbia. Thanks for being here. For those of you joining late, having a bit of fun with the background. Today is the collapsing U.S. empire. This is the collapsing New York subway. I spent 12 years I did my time in New York City, 12 years living in New York City, and spent way too many times sitting on subway platforms that looked like this. They look like kind of the inner intestine, like a backed up intestine of, like a Steve Bannon or something, is what the New York subways look like. But okay. And by the way, just because I don't want to act like I'm avoiding the story, one of the other major stories that's going on right now is Israel has bombed tents. It's causing fires. That there's video circulating of people burning alive, and these are people outside of a hospital, in the courtyard of a hospital, burning alive, and it's absolutely as horrific as you can imagine. And it is getting some mainstream coverage, which is one of the reasons I'm not spending that much time on it, because I figure you can get it pretty much lots of places. The other reason is because I'm not going to show that video, because I'm sure my YouTube would be suppressed. But yeah, Israel is just, they're making James Bond villains seem light and fun. Like, honestly, is there any James Bond villain where you go, oh yeah, that's equivalent to burning sick children alive? Like, no, the James Bond villains, what, they wanted to steal some money. This MI6 dick showed up, and so they hung him from a string, lowering him slowly into a pit of sharks. Yeah, sure, but they weren't bombing hospitals. James Bond villains seem like pretty great guys compared to what Israel's doing. And here's from even the New York Times. And again, this is rare because it's coming from your mainstream media. It's coming from the New York Times, which has done almost nothing but run coverage for Israel to commit genocide over the past year. So this is rare, but there's so much pressure on the world knows what's going on. And so there just comes a point where the New York Times, some of these others, they just can't, they got to talk about it a little bit. They got to report on it here and there occasionally. Here is how Israel's army uses Palestinians as human shields. Again, coming from New York Times, printed today. After Israeli soldiers found Mohammed Shubair hiding with his family in early March, they detained him for roughly 10 days before releasing him without charge. So, obviously, if they had a charge, if they had something they could get him on, if they had any connection to Hamas, they would either disappear him or execute him or something. But they had nothing. They had absolutely nothing, which is why they ultimately let him go. But so what did they do with him for those 10 days? During that time, Mr. Shubair said the soldiers used him as a human shield. Shubair, then 17, so he's a child by U.S. standards. So they grabbed a child and used him as a human shield for 10 days. And this is apparently standard practice, as you'll see in a few minutes. He said he was forced to walk handcuffed through the empty ruins of his hometown, Khan Yunis, in southern Gaza, searching for explosives set by Hamas. To avoid being blown up themselves, the soldiers made him go ahead, made him go in the front. The soldiers sent me like a dog to a booby-trapped apartment. I thought these would be the last moments of my life. So this is a strategy by Israel. This wasn't like a momentary coincidence where they were marching a captive ahead of them and he happened to be, the one that would be encountering bombs first. No, they've grabbed someone. They know they've got a child. They know is innocent because otherwise they would have disappeared him. They know he's innocent. They grab him and they march him into any places that they think might have bombs so that he'll die and not them if there is a bomb. Investigation by the New York Times found the Israeli soldiers and intelligence agents throughout the war in Gaza have regularly forced captured Palestinians like Mr. Schubert to conduct life-threatening reconnaissance missions to avoid putting Israeli soldiers at risk on the battlefield. And here's another reason, it's the New York Times, or another aspect of it, is they could have done this investigation roughly 11 months ago. Like, Israel's been doing this for the past year, but New York Times waited for a year of light pressure to do some reporting like this to finally do their research. While the extent and scale of such operations are unknown, the practice, illegal under both Israeli and international law, so it's a war crime and it's a crime under Israeli law, has been used by at least 11 squads in 5 cities in Gaza, often with the involvement of officers from Israeli intelligence agencies. Detainees have been forced to scout and film inside tunnel networks where soldiers believe fighters were still hiding. They have entered buildings rigged with mines to find hidden explosives. They've been told to pick up or move objects like generators and water tanks that Israeli soldiers feared concealed tunnel entrances or booby traps. The Times interviewed 7 Israeli soldiers who observed or participated in the practice and presented it as routine, commonplace, and organized, conducted with considerable logistic support and the knowledge of superiors on the battlefield. So all of that is to say, this is not a rogue group of Israeli soldiers. Some of the shit that goes on by Israeli soldiers is a rogue group of Israeli soldiers acting like idiots because they are genocidal maniacs. But most of it is not an accident. This is not a rogue group. This is not a bad apple. This is by design. Like they said, it's organized. It's often done. It's commonplace. It is using human shields, which again, Israel is always trying to project onto Hamas or onto people that Israel's fighting. Oh, they use human shields. No, literally, it's Israel using human shields. And it's kind of hilarious because the people who try and defend Israel's genocide, the Jordan Petersons and the Ben Shapiros and the Bill Maher's, sometimes even Pierce Morgan will say this. They'll list things that Hamas has been accused of. Some of them true, and they'll say, "Oh, they just Hamas kills civilians and they use human shields and they do this and that." And their end point is Israel's not like that. Israel doesn't do those things. So Hamas is uniquely bad. But the truth is, on a lot of these things, like with the human shields, it's not Hamas doing it. It's Israel doing it. It's Israel legit using human shields. And yes, as Jay Blue mentions in the comments, it's Israel that's actually raping prisoners, right? That's been largely reported. It was even debated by the Knesset, by the Israeli parliament, as to whether that should be allowed. And they decided, yeah, sure, why not? So same thing with the rapes. It's them projecting what they're actually doing. But yeah, so this is a pretty extensive report by the New York Times talking about Israel using human shields, in this case, a child. And, they point out that the New York Times points out, oh, we couldn't find out, or we couldn't find anyone who'd been killed doing this. So none of the human shields had been blown up. But here's the thing is of all of the investigation the New York Times did, and most people are able to do, who are you going to talk to? Well, you're going to talk to two types of people. You're going to talk to the human shields who are now released, like this Mr. Shubir. So that's going to be one of the main people. Well, they're going to be dead. And then the other thing is going to be all the witnesses that saw this person killed when they're being used as a human shield. And all those witnesses are going to be, guess what? Israeli soldiers. So if you're talking about them walking into a booby-trapped apartment or something. So those Israeli soldiers are not going to run to the New York Times, whether they're anonymous or not going to run to the New York Times and go, hey, yeah, we used a human shield and we blew a guy up. They're going to claim, no, none of them were ever harmed. So the fact that New York Times hasn't found any that died does not mean that there aren't countless dying as Israel uses them as human shields. Okay, I'm going to move on. Generally, the show, for several months after October 7th, the show is just a full hour of Israel's genocide, details of it. Now the show has moved on to the first half hour is details of Israel's ongoing genocide. Really horrific shit. And our mainstream media just does an absolute garbage job of covering all this. But now I want to get to a bunch of other stories. I'm even going to get to a solution that is working well in Illinois to one of the biggest problems with our prison industrial complex. What? There's an answer that actually works? How could that be? Yeah, the answers are out there. And I'm going to bring you some of that coming up in a second. A lot of important stories. So do me a favor and click the like button, click the share button, click all the buttons you got. Any buttons, just click buttons. All the buttons, just push them. And I'm so thankful you guys have been listening to and rating, throwing in the 5-star ratings for my new podcast, which is called Just Comedy. I am almost to my initial target, which was 50. I wanted to get 50 reviews, 50 5-star reviews on, I'm hoping 5-star, but listen to your heart. Okay. 50 5-star reviews on Spotify, and it's free to listen, but it's free to listen on any platform. But I've just been watching the number of Spotify reviews, but I'm sure there's reviews on other platforms. But it's called Just Comedy because it is just my comedy material. That doesn't mean it doesn't address important stuff. In fact, the latest episode 3, has my it's like 12 minutes, 15-minute segment on the dark lies of Elon Musk and his history and the truth about his history. So it still covers important shit, but it's all comedy. It also, that episode 3, also has the dark history of Cargill, one of the largest and most destructive companies on the face of the earth. So, check that out when you listen to podcasts. But I was also asking, even if you refuse to ever listen to a comedy podcast that would make you happy and would make your life such an amazing, wonderful, or at least better thing, it would make your life a better thing. If you still refuse, you could just go to like Spotify, look up Just Comedy with Lee Camp, and click the review and review it. Give it a 5-star review. Sharon in the chat is asking whether Jeremy is still in Israeli prison. Obviously, you joined the episode late. I don't blame you for that, Sharon. I understand. But we have covered that. And yes, Jeremy Lafredo is free in Israel. He's not allowed to leave. They've taken his passport. But what they're doing right now is trying to build a case against him in order to lock him up for years and years. And we have to hope that whatever bullshit they ultimately put forward, it is not enough to lock him up. And that maybe the Biden administration gets off their goddamn ass and actually defends an American journalist. Here's also where you can find the new podcast. Linktree.com/Lee Camp has the link to the Spotify page. Okay, let's move on though. And thank you all also for joining up at leecamp.net or at patreon.com/LeeCamp and supporting this show. I want to get to, this is one of the largest, before I get to what Illinois has done that's really worked, this is one of the largest bank fines in history. This is TD Bank fined $3 billion for enabling drug cartel money laundering, the largest penalty of its kind in U.S. history. And let's play a few minutes of Merrick Garland, Attorney General, talking about this. And for some odd reason, he has a young man standing behind him who looks like he's being held hostage. Like, it really seems that there's some sort of laser, sniper sight on the poor kid's forehead. I'm not sure what they said to him to put him up there, but I hope he gets freed. I hope someone helps him. Anyway, here's Merrick Garland.
Including conspiring to violate the Bank Secrecy Act.
Hold on. Playing it at fast forward speed again.
To violate the bank. TD Bank pled guilty to multiple felonies, including conspiring to violate the Bank Secrecy Act and commit money laundering. TD Bank has also agreed to a $1.8 billion criminal penalty. Combined with civil enforcement actions announced today by other agencies, the United States will be imposing a total of approximately $3 billion against TD Bank. TD Bank created an environment that allowed financial crime to flourish. By making its services convenient for criminals, it became one. Today, TD Bank became the largest bank in U.S. history to plead guilty to Bank Secrecy Act program failures and the first bank in history to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit money laundering.
Okay, so they're very proud of the fact that they got TD Bank and they're going to charge them $3 billion. And of course, I like to bring you kind of the deeper reality of some of these stories. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not good news. It's good news anytime a bank gets fined or for doing something. But there's a few aspects of this that, of course, will never be mentioned on mainstream media. One of them is that the main thing they're getting charged for or fined for, this billions of dollars, is for money laundering, taking money and making it seem like it's being used for something else. Now, of course, that type of law only applies to, like, the criminals that are viewed as criminals by U.S. law. So it's like if you're a drug dealer and you use a bank for money laundering, that is called money laundering. However, if you are the largest money launderer in the world, the U.S. Pentagon, then it doesn't count. It doesn't matter, and no one will ever come after you. The U.S. Pentagon takes $1 trillion a year, rinses it in something called national security, and then hands it out to weapons contractors and lobbyists throughout the nation, enriching them beyond anyone's wildest imaginations. And none of that money laundering is bad. That's all good money laundering. That's all positive money laundering. Of course, a lot of that money then serves the purpose of murdering children and killing innocent people around the world. It funds the bombs that go to Israel to rain down on children. All of that money laundering is the good kind of money laundering. All good, all fine, not a problem. The bad kind is when you're a drug dealer and you put money in a bank and then it comes out the other end to make it look like it wasn't connected to drugs when it was. That's the bad kind. That kind you can get in trouble for. And that's just one example. There's plenty more examples, of the big pharma laundering. I mean, that's drug dealing, right? But that doesn't count either because big pharma is good and just and not a problem, even though they kill hundreds of thousands of Americans a year die from opioids alone, which was created by big pharma, even if one of the biggest killers nowadays is the black market, fentanyl or something. Much of this problem was created by big pharma, Purdue Pharmaceutical. So that's a little bit of the behind the scenes that they won't tell you as they prosecute TD Bank. Again, I'm not opposed to them prosecuting TD Bank. I should go for it. Anytime you can piss off a bank, just do it. Here's another aspect: is TD Bank is a Canada-based bank, and that may play a slight role here. I'm not saying that the U.S. and Canada are completely detached. Canada is pretty much a vassal state to the U.S. in most regards, but it may mean that TD Bank, despite being very powerful in America, compared to you or me, TD Bank is far more powerful, but they might not quite have the pull that, say, a Citibank or I don't even know. Ever since all the banks collapsed in 2008, I don't even know the ones that still exist. Bank of America is still around, right? I don't even know what the banks are anymore. But it may mean they have a little less power over our government than your average bank, so our government's not afraid to go after them. The Justice Department said the bank allowed at least 3 different money laundering networks to move a total of $600 million through TD Bank accounts over a period of several years. It's funny that it's $670 million, yet a few sentences down, they say in one case, a man moved $470 million in drug proceeds. So $470 million of the $670 million was one dude. That guy was busy. But anyway, I always liked it whenever there's a story like this of the government actually getting a corporation, actually getting them, actually holding them accountable. I always like to point out how much crime is being committed by these corporations that is encircling this, that they don't go after them. Also, with TD Bank, as with the other banks, they're funding genocide. They're funding oil pipelines that are killing the entire planet and kill our future. They're, funding environmental destruction in a myriad of other ways. They're funding all this stuff, but none of that is a problem. That's all the good kind. That's all the good kind of money laundering and financial crimes, etc. That's all the good kind. Okay. Wanted to bring that story, but so now let's get into something that worked in one of our larger states. Illinois did something positive, and now that it worked, and made our injustice system slightly less unjust. What do you want to bet? All the other states are going to ignore what's happened in Illinois and not do it. Not go, oh, wow, that worked. Maybe we should do it. Illinois eliminated cash bail 1 year ago, and I believe I brought you that story at the time. They eliminated cash bail. Cash bail, let me give you the background real quick, and I've covered this before. Cash bail is completely unjust. It heavily punishes the poor and those who are not rich in a far larger way. The rich can almost always get out of prison while they wait for trial, while they wait for arraignment, etc. The poor, and even often just the middle class, cannot get out of prison while they wait for those things because they're told they have to pay some crazy amount of money. So it's completely unjust, and it's so unjust. Cash bail is so unjust that the United States and the Philippines are the only places in the world that have cash bail. So it is considered completely immoral just about everywhere in the world. But a year ago, Illinois made headlines as the first state to eliminate cash bail. Awesome. Go Illinois. Like many, this is the writer speaking. Like many, I feared such a sweeping change would compromise public safety. However, the anticipated chaos never materialized. Crime rates have actually dropped in Illinois. Now, fear should no longer prevent states from taking similar actions. Oh, the bullshit claim that you get rid of cash bail and all these violent people are running around just stabbing nuns in the throat. Not true. Turns out not true. And it's just a bullshit talking point in order to keep cash bail. A lot of people make a lot of money from cash bail. You have to remember that. So they want to keep it not because they think it's more safe, because they make a lot of money. So Illinois has proved does not make the state more violent, that they got rid of cash bail. Not more violent at all. The Pretrial Fairness Act introduced a system that more accurately detains those with genuine risks while allowing low-risk individuals to await trial outside of jail. No cash is required. The goal was to create a system that better balances public safety, accountability, and individual liberties. The result? People can no longer buy their way out of pretrial detention. Basically, whether you're rich or not doesn't matter. If it's a violent crime or you have a violent history, you can be as rich as you want, and Illinois could say you're a threat to society. Now, something that's not said in this article is some of it would still, or a fair amount of it would still come down to the courts. Obviously, if the courts are corrupt and they're just locking everyone up, that could still happen, but that can happen under cash bail. So release is a presumed right for nonviolent defendants maintained through their behavior, not their bank account. For violent offenders, detention without bail remains an option, keeping public safety at the forefront. While the cash bail system was intended to ensure accountability over time, it became clear that bail amounts rarely influenced whether someone would reoffend or return to the court, nor was it the determining factor in who was detained or released. Wealthier individuals can always afford bail, regardless of the seriousness of their charges, underscoring the system's inequity. Yeah, it's a rich people get to remain free system. That's what cash bail is. The effect of bail on low-level defendants is more widespread. Many spend days in jail simply because they cannot afford small bail amounts. They often plead guilty to minor offenses, accepting time served just to regain their freedom. But the damage is already done. This may seem inconsequential. The results, however, are severe. Some lose their jobs for missing work, which can then spiral into housing instability or even losing custody of their children. Ironically, rather than preventing crime, the cash bail system often sets people on a path toward it. And that's true for a lot of our carceral system. Rather than stopping crime, it actually and rehabilitating people, it actually facilitates crime and does not rehabilitate people, and often makes their lives really shitty and unfair and unjust and impossible to navigate. And, people who have a young child and they get locked up for a year because of drug charges. Well, now the kid is being raised without a father in a single parent home. That single parent who's working just to barely pay the bills is now also not there for that child. Okay, so now you have a child with essentially zero parents. Well, let me tell you, that child ends up just doing great and no qualms there. Actually, it's devastating to societies, to communities, to everyone. Firepower says, I was blown away by the cash bail when I helped my first friend who was jailed way back in the day. Some of you are commenting on the banking, them going after the banks. Thank you for throwing in the comments, everybody. Let's see. Digger Daily says Illinois model needs to be adopted countrywide. Yeah, that's the thing about what we do here in the United States. Is basically a state will try something that decreases inequality, that helps people, that facilitates better lives, and it goes well. And then all the other states and all the other cities say, we're not fucking doing that, okay? We're doing the opposite of whatever that is. That's what we're doing. Because that helped a lot of people and made a lot of people happy and was good for society. Illinois demonstrates that a cashless bail system, when implemented thoughtfully, more effectively determines who should be released or detained. Tools like court notifications and supportive services, such as connecting to resources and voluntary treatment, have proven more successful at ensuring people follow the law and show up for court. Now that we know better, we must do better, says the article. Given that research now supports the idea that no cash bail can lead to decreased crime and overcrowded jails, other states should consider prioritizing justice and public safety over tradition. Illinois offers a compelling example of what's possible. And what this article leaves out when it says, now that research supports the idea, we've actually had that research forever, and that research is every other country. Every other country does not have cash bail. And every other country has less prisoners than the United States. And every other country is not the biggest prison state the world has ever known. So we've had this research Maybe less so in the United States, but we've had it and we know it and we're not using it. But now at least Illinois has done it. There are other states and cities talking about it and moving in that direction, which would be great. It'd be great to even slightly decrease, even just take the edge off our prison industrial complex that is the largest and worst in the world. Would certainly help. So there you go. Something that is going well, something that's working, unlike the New York City subways that are behind me. I know. Here's the thing. I know, even though I have been back to New York, I haven't lived in New York in like a decade. So I'm not saying every New York City subway looks like the image behind me, but there are those that do. Oh, I forgot. I put this article in the wrong place. This goes back to Israel for a second. People have been, I love that that Holocaust Harris has been trending on Twitter. And people have rightly been talking about how Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are supporting genocide every day. They support it in a big way. But some people seem to think Donald Trump is somehow different, but he's not. He's exactly identical, if not worse, on Israel. In fact, during the debates, he tried to claim that Kamala Harris was too easy on Palestinians, which, what? But anyway, here's a short montage put together by Ben Norton's Geopolitical Economy Report of Donald Trump and his love of Israel.
Golan Heights, I gave them the Abraham Accords. I recognized the capital of Israel and opened the embassy in Jerusalem. Gave them billions and billions of dollars. I was the best friend Israel ever had.
Were there not in Israel, the United States of America would have to invent.
Oh yeah, it's the montage includes Biden and Trump and others.
In Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
I think that it is, without any question, our imperative to do what we can to allow Israel to defend itself.
The answer should have been hit the nuclear first and worry about the rest later.
The expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States.
The expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States.
It is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys.
I have my entire career and life supported Israel.
So we're not in Israel, we'd have to invent one.
She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now.
But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself.
Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. People were afraid of stepping out of line.
For people to...
Oh my God, these are true lunatics. It really is it's a fight of who can be more of a psychopath. And I will tell you, it's a close race. It's a close race of which of these folks is more psychopathic. Holy God, those are awful, awful human beings. Yolanda says, Yolanda, you're accidentally giving me the perfect segue to the next story. So I'm going to read your comment. Yolanda says, I do not understand why economists ignore inequality when they talk about economics. And that is the perfect segue to this group that just got the Nobel Prize in Economics, and they were talking about inequality, but there are some caveats. So this is the New York Times talking about the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm sorry, not peace. No, the Nobel Prize in Economics that was given for research in global inequality, and it was awarded to Darren Acemoglu and Simon Johnson of MIT and James Robinson of the University of Chicago. The laureates delved into the world's colonial past to trace how gaps emerged between nations. arguing that countries that started out with more inclusive institutions during the colonial period tended to become more prosperous. Their pioneering use of theory and data has helped to better explain the reasons for persistent inequality between nations. Now, here's the thing. Them talking about colonialism, all right, go for it. I do not believe colonialism should be ignored. It's very important. But I find it hilarious that any of them did this work on why some nations. So they're looking specifically at why some nations are poor nations and why some nations are rich nations. And as far as I can tell from this article, obviously I haven't read the report, but as far as I can tell from the article, they don't talk about the fact that the U.S. empire, along with NATO and others, has couped and assassinated leaders, and any country that started doing well that was outside of just being a U.S. feudal state was basically crushed or taken over or co-opted or sometimes just flat out assassinated. Like, that seems to be one of the biggest reasons. I mean, you look at a country that was like changing and becoming better and the equality, and like Chile under Salvador Allende. You know, you look at a country like that, and then what did the U.S. The U.S. went running in, you know, manifested massive strikes in the country, helped facilitate a coup, executed Allende, and then the country of Chile is drowned in a horrifying dictatorship for years and years. The resources are sold off to the United States. So to have a report on why some countries are poor and some countries are rich, to me, like, fact one is how much the U.S. has fucked with them. Like, I can't imagine writing a paper and taking yourself seriously and not having that be the title. Yes, there are other factors as to, you know, the U.S. has worked with multiple countries and not all of them are as poor. Some are more poor, some are less poor, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there are other factors that are involved, such as how many resources they have to be stolen. Sometimes if there are more resources to be stolen, that means they can sell the resources to the United States for a higher price and maybe get a little richer, et cetera. But the idea that, like, you would ignore all of that, and then get a Nobel Prize in economics for finding out why some countries are poor and others are rich is just so laughable. I mean, look at the United States. The United States has gained our wealth from starting with slavery, combination of slavery and vast resources that were stolen from the Native Americans. Then you get past slavery and we start stealing resources from the rest of the world. Then you get past that and no, you don't get past that. We're still stealing resources from the rest of the world. But I mean, you add in addition to that, the petrodollar and the oil economy, where basically the world is making us rich just by selling their own oil in dollars. So, and none of that has anything to do with their report. Which is like, to me, that's just so obvious. It's like, yeah. According to the researchers, prosperity today is partly a legacy of history and specifically European colonization. Yes, you're right about that. But then, let's keep going. Countries that developed institutions that protected personal property rights and allowed for widespread economic participation tended to end up on a pathway to longer-term prosperity. Those that had extractive institutions, ones that helped elites to maintain control, but which gave workers little hope of sharing in the wealth, merely provided short-term gains for the people in power. But this acts like that extraction doesn't go on in the United States. In the United States, you have 5 people with the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50% of humans. Like, there's been massive extraction from the bottom to the top. And that's just money wise. This report on economics, just won the Nobel Prize, also ignores the definition of wealth. Apparently, wealth is just dollars. So if you live in a country where there's far more happiness, in fact, Nicaragua, this is a couple of years ago, Nicaragua was found to be the country where people most feel at peace. Was Nicaragua, or most have spent the most time feeling peacefulness, or it was one of the top one. I think it might have been the top one, but and if you were to count that as wealth, as doing well, then wow, the wealth in Nicaragua just completely destroys the United States, where most people are depressed and hopped up on Xanax and Ritalin or whatever we're taking, antidepressants and everything else. So yeah, it depends on how you define wealth. And if you are just defining wealth as how many dollars in your pocket, well, why? What does that do for you? If it's dollars in your pocket and utter misery, does it matter if you're, oh, well, I have so many green pieces of paper, but I fucking hate myself and I think about throwing my human vessel in front of a tractor trailer every single day. Wow, you are so rich and so lucky. And let's do studies on how you ended up being so lucky as to want to take your life every day. So to me, just defining wealth as the number of dollars is just pure idiocy. It's completely illogical. But that's, well, of course, what this study does. Now, there are, at a basic level, there are certain amounts of wealth that do add to happiness or the ability to attain happiness, such as if you have enough wealth where you aren't drinking unclean water, then far fewer of you and your family and your children are dying from unclean water. So there is definitely a happiness or a comfort and security that is attached to a certain level of wealth, but that is a very low level of wealth. Once it gets beyond a certain point, it's just stupidity. So I think that this shows that the Nobel Prize is garbage. But then again, they do have something called the Nobel Peace Prize that they give almost exclusively to war criminals. And the Nobel Prize was invented by and named after the inventor of dynamite. So it's fitting. It's on brand to give peace prizes to war criminals. I think that's fine. Okay, I am going to bring one more story to all of the subscribers, all the members over at leecamp.net. That's a locals page. So if you're on locals right now, stay there and I'll be there in just a second. For everybody else, I bid you farewell, but thank you for joining me today. And I would love for you to check out my new podcast. It's called Just Comedy. Might be a little hard to find on some of them because you type in Just Comedy and a million other comedy podcasts show up. But if you type in Just Comedy with Lee Camp, you should be able to find it and then click the shows tab or whatever. Should be able to find it without too much trouble. And I would love for you to click a rating and give it a rating. I was trying to hit 50. We're almost there. We're 5 short of 50 5-star ratings on Spotify. Totally free to listen to. And it's there. It's all my comedy stuff. And all my comedy segments. I will be back tomorrow. I live stream Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. I will be back with you tomorrow. And you just got to show up because they're not going to give you the alerts most of the time. So just show up 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, and join me 4 days a week. And thanks for supporting this show. And again, everybody at Locals, which is leecamp.net, if you want to join up over there, it's a whopping $6 a month to join up, 38 cents an episode. I'd love for you to do that. Join up at leecamp.net. And for everybody at Locals, I will be hanging out with you in just a second. So stay there. All right, just give me a minute. I hope you're doing well out there, those of you